The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical hymn above the pediatric ward at Sacred Heart, a sound Hannah Clarke had learned to filter out the way soldiers learn to ignore the rotor wash of Blackhawks. She moved through the corridors in faded blue scrubs, the civilian kind that didn't broadcast anything except competence, or at least, that's what she told herself. Her hands were steady on the medication cart, but her shoulders tensed when Dr. Hargrove's voice carried down the hallway, that particular cadence of authority mixed with contempt that made the younger nurses straighten like targets in a shooting range. She kept her eyes on the chart in front of her. Safer that way. The morning shift had started like every other shift for the past 8 months since she'd transferred to Sacred Heart, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. Hannah Clarke was the nurse nobody noticed, which was exactly how she'd engineered it. No committees. No volunteer leadership positions. No opportunities to be visible or memorable. She arrived before the day's shift, left after the evening crew was settled, and kept her assessment notes brief enough not to invite commentary. The tremor in her hands when a code blue alert sounded through the intercom was something she'd learned to hide by clutching a clipboard a little tighter. It wasn't fear. It was muscle memory. 12 years of muscle memory compressed into a reaction her mind still hadn't quite separated from her body. At 0847, a stretcher rolled into Bay 4 with a child who weighed less than she should. Hannah caught sight of the intake sheet from across the nurse's station before anyone formally assigned the case. 8-year-old Lily Morrison. Weight loss over 6 weeks. Admitted for diagnostic workup. Parents listed, James Morrison, USMC, and Patricia Morrison. The father's title made something in Hannah's chest tighten. Marine Commander. Like the men she'd served with at Helmand Province. Like the men under her sons, no. She stopped that thought. 8 years of practice at stopping thoughts about her son. She moved toward Bay 4 with the vitals cuff, keeping her gait measured and unremarkable. The child looked like every malnourished pediatric admission she'd seen in 8 months, skin translucent as parchment, ribs visible beneath a hospital gown that hung loose as a sheet on a clothesline. The mother sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands. The father wasn't there yet. "Hi, sweetie," Hannah said to the girl, her voice dropping to the register she used for frightened children. She'd learned that in Navy training. Projecting calm without projecting authority. Making yourself small for those who couldn't be smaller. "I'm going to check your vitals, okay? It won't hurt." Lily nodded, her eyes hollow in a way that suggested she'd been poked and prodded enough to stop expecting anything different. Hannah's fingers found the radial pulse automatically. 68 beats per minute. Slightly elevated. Her eyes moved to the child's breathing pattern, slightly labored, maybe 12 breaths per minute at rest, which was too high for a child who should be resting. She positioned the blood pressure cuff with the precision of someone who'd done this in field conditions with trembling hands and dying Marines, which meant her civilian pediatric ward work was almost meditative in its simplicity. 104/52. Low. The skin turgor on Lily's forearm showed poor elasticity, dehydration, or malnutrition, or both. Hannah's mind was already processing the pattern, the way a sonar operator processes sounds, layer beneath layer. "Your daughter is very brave," Hannah said to Patricia Morrison, keeping her tone neutral and warm in equal measure. Dr. Hargrove arrived at 0903, his expensive shoes announcing him before his voice did. Click, click, click down the linoleum corridor, expensive Italian leather that probably cost more than Hannah's entire wardrobe. He swept into Bay 4 with the kind of confidence that came from never having been questioned, never having been wrong, never having lost a patient he cared enough about to actually remember. Hannah recognized the type. She'd served with commanders like that too, the kind who got people killed because they were too certain they were right. "Lily Morrison," he said, his tone suggesting he was reading from a script written for someone else's child. "Let's get the full workup. I want a comprehensive metabolic panel, complete blood count, TAH, free T4, tissue transglutaminase antibodies for celiac screening, and let's do a CT abdomen with contrast to rule out anatomical abnormalities." Hannah's jaw tightened. She felt it happen, that small physical betrayal, the way her back teeth pressed together just slightly. 12 tests ordered. No basic screening panel. No tuberculosis serology, which was a standard screen for failure to thrive. Just expensive imaging and lab work that would go out to, she glanced at the ordered lab section, yes. Sterling Labs and Precision Diagnostics. The same two facilities that Dr. Hargrove had been routing all his pediatric referrals to for the past 4 months. All right, doctor, Hannah said, her voice coming out exactly the right pitch, deferential, agreeable, invisible. She knew the pattern. She'd seen it before, though not in a hospital. She'd seen it in procurement contracts at military installations, in supply chains, in the kind of systematic theft that happened when one person had authority and another person had a financial arrangement. The kind of arrangement that killed people slowly, through negligence wearing the mask of incompetence. Patricia Morrison looked worried. Dr. Hargrove, we've already done several of those tests. Last week, the endocrinologist ordered. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate your concern, he said, and his voice had that same edge of authority that made her stop mid-sentence, but I need to establish my own baseline. These labs will take approximately 2 hours. Hannah was already moving toward the blood draw station, her hands familiar with the 22-gauge needle and the pediatric-sized EDTA tubes. She'd done this 10,000 times. Her hands knew the angle, the depth, the twist of the needle in the vein. Her hands knew a lot of things she'd trained them to forget. Lily's left antecubital vein was visible but fragile. Hannah worked with the kind of precision that came from having inserted full lines in combat casualties while explosions rattled the tent walls. Her touch was gentle in the way that only comes from knowing how to be violent and choosing gentleness instead. The vein accepted the needle on the first stick. No fumbling. No second attempt. Just competence expressed so quietly that it was almost invisible. As she labeled the tubes, name, date, time, barcode, her eyes fell on Lily's existing chart again. 12 different specialist referrals in 42 days. 12. The number rolled through her mind like a ticking clock. 12 different tests for systems that might need investigation, yes. But no basic tuberculosis screening. No simple TB skin test or quantiferin gold assay. No infectious disease workup at all, just expensive imaging that would find nothing because nothing was being looked for in the right way. The kind of systematic missing that happened when the system was designed to miss. Hannah delivered the labs to the collection station and watched as Dr. Hargrove signed the order form without looking at it, his attention already pivoting toward the next patient, the next set of billable services. She'd trained herself not to feel things about observations like that. Feeling things was dangerous. Feelings made you speak. Speaking made you visible. Visible made you vulnerable. The silence in the corridor was interrupted by the sound of a military vehicle pulling into the parking lot outside. The distinctive gear shift, the specific cadence of a Marine convoy arriving. Hannah's hand stilled on the chart. She didn't move toward the window. She didn't look. But her body recognized the sound the way muscle remembers things the mind tries to forget. Commander James Morrison had arrived. Hannah retreated to the medication cart and began counting doses of acetaminophen, the kind of mindless task that gave her hand something to do while her training assessed every detail she'd gathered in the past 2 hours. A child losing weight. A doctor ordering expensive tests while avoiding basic screening. A pattern of referrals to the same 3 labs. A father arriving in uniform at a hospital where his daughter lay malnourished and underdiagnosed. The doors to Bay 4 opened. She didn't turn. She didn't look. But she listened to the sound of boots on linoleum, the cadence of someone trained to walk with purpose, the kind of gait that came from decades of authority worn like a second skin. Commander Morrison. The same rank structure as her own chain of command, just a different service. And then she heard Lily's voice, small and fractured, saying, "Daddy." Hannah's hands trembled as she gripped the medication cart. Not from fear. From recognition. From the terrible, familiar weight of knowing something was wrong and knowing that she was the only one who'd noticed, and knowing that speaking up meant becoming visible, meant ending the careful invisibility she'd constructed to survive the last 8 years. She steadied her breathing. One long count in. One longer count out. The way the Navy had taught her. The way survival required. Whatever was happening to Lily Morrison, whatever pattern Dr. Hargrove had engineered, whatever arrangement of money and negligence had created this moment, it had just become Hannah's problem. And Hannah Clarke was very, very good at solving problems that everyone else had missed. Hannah steps into Lily Morrison's room during morning rounds with the kind of quiet efficiency that leaves no footprints. The child lies propped on pillows, her small frame swallowed by the hospital bed, breakfast untouched on the tray beside her. Oxygen cannula runs under her nose at 2 liters per minute. Her father, Marine Commander James Morrison, sits in the vinyl chair beside the bed in his dress blues, the creases so sharp they look like they could draw blood. He hasn't slept. Hannah can see it in the way his eyes track her movements, the way a man trained in threat assessment never stops assessing. "Good morning, Lily," Hannah says, her voice the texture of calm water. She checks the monitor, heart rate elevated, oxygen saturation at 94% on supplemental oxygen. Not critical yet. But trending wrong. Hannah pulls the chart from the foot of the rail. 12 specialist consultations in 4 days. Endocrinology. Oncology. Gastroenterology. Pulmonology. Infectious disease. Each audit test more elaborate than the last, each report coming back inconclusive. Blood work flagged for markers that point nowhere. CT scans of the abdomen, the chest, the sinuses. $500,000 in imaging that solved nothing while Lily's weight continues its downward trajectory, down another 2 pounds since admission. What are they looking for? Commander Morrison asks. His voice carries the weight of command, but underneath it runs something thinner. Fear. Hannah sits on the edge of the bed, her hand moving to Lily's wrist, pulse racing at 1:15. She takes her time before answering, because this moment matters. The specialists are thorough. But sometimes we get so focused on the complex diagnoses we forget to rule out the simple ones first. She looks directly at the commander. Has anyone done a tuberculosis screening? A basic TB skin test. The words hang in the air like something visible. Commander Morrison leans forward. TB? That's uncommon. Yes. But unexplained weight loss, malaise, fatigue in an otherwise healthy child. The presentation fits. Hannah keeps her voice level, professional, the way she once briefed officers before operations in Sanjin Valley. It should be ruled out. Especially before we subject her to more advanced imaging. She doesn't add what she's thinking. A TB screen costs $40 and takes 48 hours for results. Every test Dr. Hargrove has ordered costs between $3,000 and $12,000. The referral lab's paying him commissions on every single one. The door swings open with the kind of force that announces arrival. Dr. Hargrove enters mid-stride, his white coat so pristine it looks factory-pressed, his stethoscope draped like a status symbol around his neck. Behind him comes the entourage, 2 residents trailing like satellites, a medical student carrying the iPad with digital charts. Commander Morrison, good to see you again, Hargrove says, his voice all practiced warmth. Then his eyes land on Hannah and the temperature drops. Nurse Clarke. Still here, I see. Hannah stands. Moves back to give him space at the bedside. Hargrove begins his assessment with theatrical precision, auscultating the lungs, palpating the abdomen, asking Lily questions she's already answered 4 times this morning. The residents watch and nod. The medical student types notes. Hannah watches Lily's oxygen saturation tick down another point, 93% now. So I understand you've been making suggestions about diagnostic protocols, Hargrove says, not looking at Hannah. His tone is conversational, almost friendly. The kind of friendly that precedes executions. Perhaps the nurse would like to share her thoughts on how a board-certified internist should manage this case. Hannah doesn't respond. She's learned that lesson already. No? Well, let me be clear for everyone present. Hargrove turns, and there's a smile on his face that doesn't reach his eyes. Tuberculosis. as a primary diagnostic consideration. For a child from a stable home with no exposure history. He laughs, actually laughs, and the sound lands like a fist in a closed fist. Perhaps the nurse should stick to emptying bedpans while the real doctors work, Commander. I apologize for Ms. Clarke overstepping her very limited education. This is exactly the kind of speculation that distracts from actual diagnostic rigor. The words are designed to land in a specific way. They do. Hannah takes one measured breath. The kind of breath you take before breaching a compound. She feels the single tear, unexpected, unwelcome, escape down her left cheek. She wipes it away with the heel of her palm without breaking eye contact with the wall behind Hargrove's shoulder. When she speaks, her voice has dropped. It comes from somewhere deeper than her chest. That little girl's father is fighting for our country while you're fighting for your bank account. The room goes dead silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the ventilator hissing, the monitor beeping, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing their electric hymn. The resident's pen stops moving mid-note. The medical student's fingers freeze on the iPad. Commander Morrison's head turns toward Hannah with the precision of a weapon acquiring a target. Hargrove's face darkens, actual darkening, the blood draining then flooding back, rage and something else, something that looks like fear. You're done. You're finished here. Security. I'm leaving, Hannah says. She's already moving toward the door, but it's not a retreat. It's a tactical withdrawal. She doesn't run. She doesn't cry. She walks out with her spine straight and her hand steady and her voice still locked down in that deeper register that used to give orders to Marines. The break room at 10:45 in the morning smells like microwaved coffee and the ghost of someone's breakfast sandwich. For nurses sit at the table, Sandra, Michael, Jennifer, and David. They're not talking. Just eating, scrolling phones, existing in the way people do when they're waiting for something to break. Hannah sets down her lunch, a protein bar she bought from the vending machine, something to do with her hands, and pulls out a chair. She sits. Doesn't speak. Sandra looks at Michael. Michael glances at Jennifer. Jennifer's jaw tightens. David stands up first, quietly, scraping his chair back. He carries his tray to the sink without looking at Hannah. Then Sandra, gathering her salad, her water bottle, her phone, all of it, moving toward the door. Jennifer follows. Michael is the last, and he pauses, just for a second, at the threshold. When he speaks, his voice is barely audible. Hargrove says you're making trouble for everyone. He told administration you're a liability. Then he leaves. Hannah sits alone at the table with her protein bar and the fluorescent hum and the knowledge that the hospital has picked its side. She's not surprised. She learned a long time ago that institutions protect themselves first. The wounded get left behind. The whistlers get silenced. The people who ask the hard questions get pushed out into the rain. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a disciplinary write-up appears on the unit board. Printed on official hospital letterhead. Her name at the top. The document is clinical in its cruelty. Citation for overstepping scope of practice. Unauthorized diagnostic suggestions to attending physician. Insubordination. A recommendation pending investigation. Signature, Dr. Marcus Hargrove, attending physician, Department of Internal Medicine. Hannah reads it while staff walk past, their eyes sliding away like she's contagious. Her hand moves unconsciously to her right pocket, where the faded unit patch sits sewn into the jacket lining she still keeps there. The patch is from her son's first deployment, Task Force Liaison, a stitched reminder of when she could still protect him from 3,000 miles away. Her fingers touch the fabric through the cotton and linen, old muscle memory seeking something solid to ground against. That evening, in his office on the 4th floor, Dr. Hargrove makes a call to the board president. His voice is measured, professional, the voice of a man solving problems. We have a situation with one of the nursing staff. Her name is Hannah Clarke. She's becoming disruptive, undermining medical authority in front of patients and families. I filed a formal complaint, but I think we need to move quickly to contain this before she costs us our referral relationships. He listens to the response, then, yes, I've already had HR pull her file. There's nothing there, no employment history prior to 2 years ago, no references we can contact, essentially no background. It makes termination very clean. No one to fight on her behalf. He pulls her thin personnel file from the cabinet. Just the basics. Application. Emergency contact, a phone number for her son that she hasn't updated in 6 months. No previous employment listed. No achievements. No recommendations. No history. Nothing that explains who she was before Sacred Heart. Nothing at all. Morning rounds at Sacred Heart began at 6:47. Hannah knew because she'd memorized the rhythm of the pediatric ward, the fluorescent lights flickering to full brightness at exactly that moment, the coffee machine gurgling to life in the break room, the soft padding of feet as the day shift arrived to replace the night staff. She was checking for lines on the 3rd floor when she heard it. Not a monitor alarm. Not a code announcement. Something worse. A child's gasp. Raw. Panicked. Coming from room 312. Lily Morrison's oxygen saturation was dropping like a stone. The numbers on the monitor read 89, 86, 82. Hannah moved before her brain finished processing. No hesitation. No checking protocol. Muscle memory took over, the kind that didn't come from civilian nursing school. She was through the door in 4 seconds. The girl's chest wasn't rising properly on the right side. Each breath pulled her small ribcage inward at an angle that made no anatomical sense. Her lips were already tinged pale. The respiratory therapist, a wiry man with the last name Greco and a tattoo of a rifle on his forearm that Hannah recognized as the emblem of the 2nd Marines, was fumbling with an oxygen mask, his movements scattered. No one had called a code. No one had called Dr. Hargrove. They were just standing there, watching an 8-year-old suffocate in front of them. Tension pneumothorax, Hannah said. Not a question. Not a request. A diagnosis delivered in the flat, certain tone of someone who'd seen this exact presentation in combat field hospitals where you didn't have time for second opinions. Right side. We're at 2 minutes before her cardiac output collapses. The day shift nurse, a woman named Patricia who turned her back to Hannah in the break room yesterday, stared. We need to wait for Dr. Hargrove to order imaging, Anne. Hannah was already moving to the crash cart. 40 seconds. That's how long she had before this child's body would start shutting down. She'd learned this in a dust storm outside Sanjin Valley, when a 19-year-old Marine from Bravo Company took shrapnel in his chest and started gasping exactly like this. She'd been a senior chief petty officer then. She was a nurse now. The skills didn't expire. The urgency didn't fade. 14-gauge angiocath, Hannah said. To Greco. Not Patricia. She could read the recognition in his eyes. He'd seen something in her movements, the economical precision, the absence of panic, the way her hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times. Because they had. Greco moved. He handed her the needle without asking why she was taking it, without waiting for physician authorization that protocol demanded, because some instincts in medicine survive every bureaucracy. Hannah's left hand found the intercostal space, 2nd rib, midclavicular line, with the muscle memory of a person who'd memorized human anatomy not from textbooks but from desperate situations where getting it wrong meant watching someone die. She steadied Lily's chest. The girl was crying now, struggling, her oxygen saturation at 78. 76. Hannah pressed the needle through skin that felt impossibly fragile under her fingertips, through muscle, through the pleural lining. She was moving with the kind of calm that only came from having already survived the worst. There was no room for uncertainty. No time for doubt. The hiss of air escaping. That sound. That exact sound. It was unmistakable, the release of pressurized air from a collapsed lung re-expanding, the hiss of a pneumothorax suddenly decompressed. Lily's chest rose. Her breathing steadied. Her color shifted from pale gray back toward something that resembled a healthy 8-year-old's flesh tone. The monitor numbers climbed. 84. 88. 92. 94. Stable. Hannah withdrew the needle with the same methodical precision she'd used to insert it, taped the angiocath in place with 3 strips of paper tape, and stepped back. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. She felt the weight of the faded unit patch through the layers of her jacket, pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat. Greco's face had changed. He was straightening, and his eyes, they were different now. Fixed on Hannah with the intensity of someone who'd just recognized something they thought they'd never see again. A Marine veteran recognizing another Marine. Not the posture or the bearing, though those were there. But the competence. The specific, unmistakable competence of someone trained in combat medicine. Someone who'd worked under fire. Someone who'd had to make decisions like this with people screaming and time collapsing and the weight of lives depending on hands that didn't shake. "Get me the TB screening kit," Hannah said quietly. "And call radiology. Stat chest x-ray to confirm the pneumothorax is resolved." Patricia was reaching for her phone. The other nurse was still staring. Lily's eyes were beginning to focus, her breathing no longer desperate, her small hand reaching for the oxygen mask Hannah had adjusted to comfort instead of crisis. In the hallway, Hannah could hear footsteps. Running. Multiple voices. Someone was calling for the attending physician. She knew what was about to happen. She could feel it moving toward her like weather, like inevitability, like something that had started the moment she'd suggested that TB screen and watched Dr. Hargrove's face shift into something cold and calculating. The medical skill she'd just demonstrated, the kind that couldn't be taught in 2 years of nursing school, the kind that came from field triage and trauma units, and the kind of focused intensity you learned only when lives were literally counting down in seconds, that was going to be the evidence they used against her. Greco was still looking at her. His jaw had set in a way that suggested he understood exactly what was coming. He knew. And he was watching her the way you watch someone walking into fire. The door opened. Dr. Hargrove appeared, his white coat crisp, his expression prepared to be the hero of whatever crisis this was. His eyes took in Lily's stabilized vital signs, the angiocath, Hannah standing motionless at the foot of the bed, and something flickered across his face. Not gratitude. Not recognition. Fear. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Hannah to see it. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Tension pneumothorax," Hannah said. "Needle decompression at 2 minutes before cardiac collapse. Saturation restored from 76 to 94. Stable now." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Hargrove's phone was in his hand. His fingers were moving. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth as oil spreading across water. "Yes, this is Dr. Hargrove. I need you here immediately. Yes, patient safety violation. Unauthorized procedure. I want her badge and I want her escorted out today." Hannah stood very still. She could hear the ventilator humming in the corner. Could hear Lily's breathing, finally normal, finally safe. Could feel every eye in the room fixed on her, Patricia's shocked, Greco's knowing, the other nurses confused and beginning to shift toward fear. She was about to be destroyed for saving a child's life. But Lily Morrison was breathing. Dr. Hargrove's hands trembled as he dialed the board president at 3:14 p.m., his voice steady but urgent through the hospital phone. "She performed an unauthorized procedure without physician oversight," he said, the words emerging smooth as oil. "Needle decompression. Completely outside scope of practice for nursing staff. Patient safety is my primary concern." What he didn't say was that the phone in his other hand had already connected him to 3 references at Hannah's previous hospital, each call carefully worded to plant seeds of doubt. "You might want to verify her background," he'd told them. "We're reviewing some concerning patterns here." The board president listened, the way they always did when a physician called with concerns backed by institutional authority. Hargrove had spent 14 years building exactly this kind of influence, the kind that made people nod and take notes and stop asking questions. Investigators arrived at Sacred Heart at 3:48 p.m., two men in dark suits who carried the weight of regulatory language like weapons. They found Hannah in the break room restocking supplies, and she looked up without surprise when they showed their credentials. Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke, the taller one, asked, though they already knew the answer. She nodded once, setting down the stack of latex gloves. "We need to speak with you regarding an incident in pediatric trauma this morning." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. Hannah stood, her movement precise and economical, and followed them to a small office where Dr. Hargrove was already waiting, his expression arranged into concerned professionalism. The patient was in acute distress, Hannah explained, her voice measured and flat. Tension pneumothorax. Diminished breath sounds bilaterally. Tracheal deviation. The attending physician was not present. The child was dying. She stated facts like coordinates. No emotion. No defensive edge. Just data. The investigators exchanged a glance, the kind that usually meant they'd already decided. Hargrove smiled. Technically correct, but she acted outside her scope of practice. A physician should have. The child would have died, Hannah said. Not a question. Not an argument. A statement of medical fact delivered in the same tone someone might use to describe oxygen saturation readings. But the investigators weren't doctors. They were bureaucrats, and bureaucrats follow chains of command, not medical truth. The interview lasted 42 minutes. They asked about her training, her certifications, her understanding of hospital policy. Hannah answered each question with economy and precision. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain Hargrove's kickback scheme or the 12 unnecessary specialists or the basic TB screen that should have been ordered weeks ago. She simply confirmed what she'd done and why, as if the righteousness of her actions was irrelevant to the proceedings. Which, in a hospital, it usually was. By 4:13 p.m., Human Resources had a termination letter waiting. Hannah Clarke was escorted from the building by security, a man who'd once brought his daughter to see her after Hannah had sat with the girl through post-surgical recovery. He wouldn't meet her eyes now. Her badge was surrendered at the front desk. Her locker was emptied into a cardboard box by a staffer who'd never spoken to her, just folded scrubs and a pair of compression socks and a half-empty bottle of hand lotion into the sides. The box weighed almost nothing. Hannah carried it to her car, rain beginning to fall across the Norfolk skyline in sheets that hammered the asphalt like accusation. Riverside Cemetery sprawled across 17 acres of wet grass and granite markers, and Hannah drove there without deciding to, muscle memory carrying her past the front gate to the plot she visited exactly twice a year, David's birthday and the anniversary of Helmand. She parked and sat in the car for 4 minutes, watching rain stream down the windshield, then stepped out into weather that soaked through her scrubs immediately. The marker read, CPO David Clarke, Navy EOD, beloved husband. Beloved father. The second title still made her chest collapse inward. She knelt in the mud beside the stone, ignoring the wet that worked through her pants, and pulled from her jacket pocket the faded unit patch she'd carried for 8 years, an embroidered eagle wrapped in gold thread, the colors bleeding slightly where rain had found its way inside. The patch was the only piece of David she'd kept visible. The rest she'd buried in boxes and closed minds, and a deliberate choice to become invisible. I walked away from everything after Helmand, she whispered to the wet stone. Tried to hide and heal. Tried to be invisible so nobody would ask what I'd done there. Built a quiet life where nobody knew what I was. Her voice cracked on the next part. And I still failed. Couldn't stay in without breaking. Can't stay hidden without failing. She opened her hand and looked at the patch trembling against her palm, mud from the cemetery dirt staining the embroidered edges. He's deployed with Morrison's unit. Our son is deployed with Morrison's unit. And I couldn't even protect Morrison's daughter without losing everything again. The rain fell harder, mixing with tears she'd promised herself she wouldn't shed, and she stayed on her knees in the mud for another 7 minutes until her legs went numb and her phone buzzed with a news alert about a child hospitalized at Sacred Heart for TB exposure. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, in pediatric isolation room for 12, Commander James Morrison sat in a plastic chair beside his daughter's bed watching her sleep, tubes running into her small arm like anchors keeping her tethered to the living. The attending physician, a woman named Dr. Patel who'd been brought in after Hargrove's initial dismissal of the case, had confirmed what should have been obvious 48 hours earlier: disseminated tuberculosis. The kind that kills children when it spreads to the brain. The kind that 12 specialists could have caught if a physician hadn't been routing referrals toward profit margins instead of patient safety. Morrison had watched the woman in scrubs move during those final moments in the trauma bay, had recognized something in her efficiency that reminded him of his own team leaders, that bone-deep competence that came from having seen the worst and choosing to act anyway. He'd asked for her name afterward, wanting to thank her, and been told she was a nurse who'd overstepped her authority and been terminated for patient safety violations. The words had made something in his chest go cold. In the hospital basement, IT specialist Torres watched security footage from 3:52 p.m. showing Dr. Hargrove accessing the hospital's digital archive and attempting to delete video files from Lily's room. Torres had written his own job description 7 years ago to include one additional responsibility: document everything. He'd survived 3 combat deployments and learned that the only thing worse than making enemies was making them think they'd gotten away with something. He saved every frame of video, every deleted email, every digital footprint showing money moving from insurance companies into accounts registered to Hargrove's private LLC. The hiss of the backup drive capturing data sounded like the closing of a trap. Torres made copies. Then he made copies of the copies. Then he waited, because timing was everything. The hospital admitted Lily for immediate TB treatment at 7:19 p.m., the infection protocol now activated with quiet urgency and the kind of expedited care that should have started 20 days earlier. Nobody mentioned that Dr. Hargrove had actively discouraged a TB screen. Nobody mentioned that the basic test cost $47 and the cascade of referrals he'd ordered instead had cost $18,400. Nobody mentioned the woman who'd saved the child's life or asked why she'd been fired. But Commander Morrison knew. And he wasn't the kind of man who forgot. Her son arrived home at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, skateboard under one arm, backpack slung across his shoulder, and found the termination letter sitting on the kitchen counter like a grenade with the pin already pulled. The white envelope bore the hospital's embossed logo. His mother's name typed in that clinical font hospitals use when they're destroying someone's life. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, reading the words: unauthorized procedure, scope of practice violation, immediate termination effective, and then he moved. Not toward the letter. Not toward the phone. Toward her bedroom closet. He knew. 17-year-old boys know their mothers better than anyone admits, and Marcus Clarke had watched his mother move through the world with a precision that didn't match a civilian nurse's training. The way she assessed spaces. The way her hand stayed steady when other people trembled. The way she touched that faded patch sewn inside her jacket like other people touched rosaries. He pulled the closet door open and shoved hangers aside until his fingers found the metal case wedged behind her winter boots, the case she thought he didn't know about, wedged so far back that it existed in the space between who she was and who she pretended to be. The metal case was smaller than he'd imagined. Brass corners worn smooth from handling. He opened it and there they were, 2 bronze stars the color of old honey, each ribbon precisely folded. A purple heart with its profile facing up. And one decoration so heavy it seemed to pull the entire case downward, the Navy Cross, its anchor and sword design catching the bedroom light like it was still catching something far more important than light. Beneath each medal, a citation card in her handwriting. Beneath those, photographs from a life she never mentioned. Hannah Clarke in dress blue standing in front of a Black Hawk helicopter. Hannah Clarke's hands holding a wounded Marine. Hannah Clarke's face, younger and harder, somewhere that looked like sand and dust and aftermath. Marcus closed the case with a soft click. He knew what he had to do. He drove her back to Sacred Heart at 6:16 p.m., the medal case on the passenger seat between them wrapped in her jacket. His mother didn't ask questions. She sat with her window down, rain starting to fall, watching Norfolk pass like she was saying goodbye to something. But she wasn't. Neither of them was. The boy parked in the visitor section and they walked through the main entrance, his mother moving with the careful precision of someone entering a building that had already tried to erase her, and Marcus moving with the absolute certainty of someone who knew what was about to happen. The administration office occupied the third floor. The board was still in session, for faces around a mahogany table, Dr. Hargrove's personnel file spread in front of them like evidence at a trial. Security tried to stop them. Marcus simply said, "My mother is Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke," and kept walking. His voice didn't waver. 17 years old, and he moved through that doorway like he'd carried the weight of his mother's silence into the room and set it down in the center of their table. The board president's hand froze on the file folder. One of the board members, a nurse Hannah had worked with for 6 months without ever mentioning her service record, stood up so quickly her chair scraped backward. She reached for Hannah's personnel file and stopped, her hand shaking slightly as she pulled open the drawer beneath the conference table. The real file. The one that had been sitting there the entire time, untouched, while Hargrove's termination recommendation gathered dust above. She opened it and began to read aloud, 3 combat deployments. 2005 to 2008. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Role designation, Combat Medical Officer, attached to Marine Expeditionary Force. The room went so quiet you could hear the rain against the windows, the sound of water hitting glass like someone drumming a warning. Bronze Star, 2nd Class, 2006. The nurse read each line as if speaking a prayer for someone she'd already buried. Bronze Star, 2nd Class, 2007. Her voice caught. Purple Heart, 2007. She looked up from the page, her eyes finding Hannah's face. Navy Cross, 2008. For extraordinary heroism during combat operations in Kandahar Province. Citation reads, she paused, breathing past something in her chest. For extracting 12 wounded Marines under sustained enemy fire, returning 4 times to a burning compound, receiving fragment wounds to the left shoulder and neck, and refusing medical evacuation until all personnel were secured. The board president stood. Then sat back down. Then stood again because standing seemed to be the only appropriate response to the kind of valor that had just walked through his office door wearing civilian scrubs. The side entrance opened and Commander James Morrison stepped through with a man behind him, tall, carrying himself with the kind of stillness that comes from military service that goes deeper than rank. The SEAL liaison. Morrison's jaw was set at an angle that suggested he'd made phone calls. Important ones. The kind that got answered immediately. The SEAL looked at Hannah and started speaking, each word a hammer strike, Bronze Star for valor under fire. Bronze Star for medical innovation that saved 3 lives during a July 2006 engagement in Punjab. Purple Heart for service-connected wound sustained during insurgent rocket attack on forward operating base Shank. He paused. Hannah's face remained perfectly composed. Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. 12 Marines came home because you went back for times. 12 families have dinner together at night because you decided that leaving was unacceptable. The FBI agent arrived 7 minutes later. She didn't knock. She entered like she owned the room, and technically she did, federal authority spreading across the mahogany table like a stain that couldn't be cleaned. Financial records fanned out before her, 18 months of billing patterns, kickback transfers, routing numbers that led directly to 3 outside laboratories that Hargrove owned partial stakes in. The numbers were precise and they were damning, $47,000 in unnecessary CT scans ordered specifically because they generated referral fees. $12,500 in MRI imaging that a simple TB screen would have made obsolete. Hargrove had created a system where his financial interest superseded diagnostic accuracy, where a child's deterioration was secondary to his profit margins. Lily Morrison should have been diagnosed in the first 7 days. The FBI agent's voice carried the particular flatness of someone who'd seen this pattern before and would see it again. A tuberculosis test costs $47. It generates zero referral revenue. Dr. Hargrove steered every specialist away from basic diagnostics because basic diagnostics don't pay commissions. Your daughter nearly died because her symptoms interfered with his cash flow. Commander Morrison stood, and when he did, the entire room seemed to understand that they were in the presence of someone who'd made decisions that cost lives and saved lives with equal gravity. My daughter is in the pediatric ward right now receiving TB treatment that should have started 6 weeks ago. Because of him. The commander looked at Hargrove with the kind of expression that suggested he'd seen worse men in Fallujah, but that didn't mean he had to tolerate them in Norfolk. And because of Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke, my daughter is alive to receive that treatment. That was when Hargrove made his final error. He tried his network. The board president's personal cell phone, the one they discussed at the golf club. A call to an ally at state medical licensing. An attempt to move assets into an untraceable account. But IT specialist Torres had been watching since Hannah's termination. Torres, who'd recognized her bearing during the first week she worked at Sacred Heart, the kind of bearing that comes from having carried impossible weight and learned to move beneath it. He'd saved every frame of security footage Hargrove attempted to delete. Every email discussing kickback arrangements with lab partners. Every text to insurance company contacts promising convenient referrals in exchange for percentage cuts. By midnight, Hargrove's medical license was suspended pending investigation. His bank accounts were frozen. Assets were seized to repay the $340,000 in fraudulent billing that had been systematized through his office during 18 consecutive months of calculated harm. Security escorted him from the building with the same protocol they'd used on Hannah 6 hours earlier. 18 months passed. Lily Morrison's hair grew back. Her weight stabilized. She started volunteering in the pediatric ward, insisted on it, actually, with the particular stubbornness of children who've learned that the only way forward is through, and through meant helping other sick children navigate what she'd survived. Commander Morrison visited every other Friday to pick her up from her shift in the child life department, and on a Friday in late April, he parked in the visitor section and walked inside to collect her. Through the pediatric ward window, he saw his daughter standing beside a woman in scrubs, not a nurse anymore, not quite yet, but something different. Something more. Senior Chief Petty Officer Hannah Clarke had her Navy uniform embroidered quietly on the pocket of her scrubs, her name and rank no longer hidden, no longer something to be ashamed of. She was teaching Lily how to position a stethoscope, how to listen for the baseline heartbeat before assessing changes. Lily's face held the absolute concentration of a child learning how to care for someone else, and Hannah's hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this before, not in a hospital, but in the field, under fire, when precision meant the difference between another person's heartbeat continuing or stopping. In the parking lot, rain began to fall again, and beneath the overhang near the main entrance, a folding table displayed supplemental insurance brochures in neat rows. Dr. Hargrove sat behind it in a discount suit jacket, his medical license permanently revoked, his career liquidated, his network dismantled. He didn't look up as Commander Morrison passed. No one stopped at his table. No one took his brochures. The rain fell harder and he began packing his materials into a cardboard box, alone in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside, Hannah squeezed Lily's shoulder gently. That's the right placement. Now listen. The girl's face changed as she heard it, that sound inside another person's chest, that proof of life continuing, the reminder of why she'd chosen to volunteer, to give back, to stand in this hospital that had almost lost her and help it become what it should have been all along. Commander Morrison watched from the threshold. He didn't interrupt. He simply stood there with his daughter's backpack slung over his shoulder, watching a senior chief petty officer mentor the next generation of healthcare workers, watching a woman who'd hidden her veil finally step into the light of it, watching a room full of people who would never know that they were standing near someone who'd gone back for times, into a burning compound to bring her Marines home. When Hannah finally turned and saw him, they locked eyes for exactly 1 second. She nodded once. He nodded back. The acknowledgement between warriors who'd both carried impossible weight and refused to set it down until everyone they loved was safe. True class is what you do when the lights go out. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your story, Click subscribe. Share this with someone who deserves to be seen. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever had to prove yourself to people who never thought to ask what you were capable of?